Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Mack here. Um, I'm going to start this evening with a new book. It's one of my favorite books. As a matter of fact, it's one of the first books that in school, it was third grade, I remember our teacher, it was the first long read aloud I remember. In other words, it was episodic. We read a little bit each day. And I remember sitting in class, and when my teacher, Mrs. Weldon, I remember distinctly what her name was in third grade, she read us Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and I was captivated, and I couldn't wait until the next day when there would be another chapter read and the illustration shown, because even then in third grade I was drawing, and I just absolutely fell in love with the story and with books. I didn't realize how much I enjoyed a good story, which in turn, which really was kind of my evolution into falling in love with books. Each book contains a world, contains people, contains characters, rich and exciting and amazing. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is without a doubt one of the best. Written by Roald Dahl, who is just a prolific children's author. It was Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is his second book. He wrote it in 1964. James and the Giant Peach was his first. He wrote that in 1961. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is dedicated to Theo Dahl, his son. And his children, Theo, spoke of their father. He was always a storyteller, and he loved telling stories. And thank goodness for all of us, he wrote a good chunk of them down. Most of you know Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. You know it because you've probably seen Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the movie, the old movie in the 70s, the newer movie with Johnny Depp. I can't remember when that was named, in the early 2000s, I think, or something. But you know, the original is, I love it. I like Johnny Depp's version of it too, but nothing beats the book. So, I'm going to read to you Charlie and the Chocolate Factory by Roald Dahl. And I'm going to show you the artwork. Joseph Schindelman was the artist he was a pen and ink artist, and he did the artwork for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and I was captivated by that too. And I remember some of the drawings in this for a for a third grader. I was 9. Sometimes some of the pictures were just a little scary, just because of the way they were, you know. But they were still fascinating and captivating. So let us begin with Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And we're going to get to chapter 1. Here comes Charlie. And as you can see, you see the awesome artwork. When you look at that artwork, it's just a little bit on the scary side when you're 9 or younger. But I loved scary stuff. Even then, I loved to be scared. So that artwork was glorious to me. These two very old people are the father and mother of Mr. Bucket. Their names are Grandpa Joe and Grandma Josephine. And these two very old, let me show you the first two old people, the ones I showed you. And these two very old people are the father and mother of Mr. Bucket. I'm sorry, I said that. And these two very old people are the father and mother of Mrs. Bucket. Their names are Grandpa George and Grandma Georgina. And that is them right there. This is Mr. Bucket and Mrs. Bucket. Mr. Bucket and Mrs. Bucket. Mr. and Mrs. Bucket have a small boy whose name is Charlie Bucket. This is Charlie. How'd you do? And how'd you do? And how'd you do again? He is pleased to meet you. The whole of his family, the 6 grown-ups, count them. The little Charlie Bucket lived together in a small wooden house on the edge of a great town. And that's their house right there. The house wasn't nearly large enough for so many people, and life was extremely uncomfortable for them all. There were only 2 rooms in the place altogether, and there was only one bed. The bed was given to the 4 old grandparents because they were so old and tired. They were so tired, they never got out of it. Grandpa Joe and Grandpa Josephine on this side, Grandpa George and Grandpa Georgina on this side. So you can see there's one set of grandparents up there and another set up there. Mr. and Mrs. Bucket and little Charlie Bucket slept in the other room upon a mattress on the floor. In the summertime, this wasn't too bad, but in the winter, freezing cold drafts blew across the floor all night long, and it was awful. There wasn't any question of them being able to buy a better house or even one more bed to sleep in. They were far too poor for that. Mr. Bucket was the only person in the family with a job. He worked in a toothpaste factory where he sat all day long at a bench and screwed the little caps onto the tops of tubes of toothpaste after the tubes had been filled. But a toothpaste cap screwer is never paid very much money, and poor Mr. Bucket, however hard-working and however fast he screwed on those caps, was never able to make enough to buy 1/2 of the things that so large a family needed. There wasn't even enough money to buy proper food for them all. The only meals they could afford were bread and margarine for breakfast, boiled potatoes and cabbage for lunch, and cabbage soup for supper. Sundays were a little bit better. They all looked forward to Sundays because then, although they had exactly the same, everyone was allowed a second helping. The Buckets, of course, didn't starve, but every one of them, the 2 old grandfathers, the 2 old grandmothers, Charlie's father, Charlie's mother, and especially little Charlie himself, went about from morning till night with a horrible empty feeling in their tummies. Charlie felt it worst of all, and although his father and mother often went without their own share of lunch or supper so they could give it to him, it still wasn't nearly enough for a growing boy. He desperately wanted something more filling and satisfying than cabbage and cabbage soup. The one thing he longed for more than anything else was chocolate. Anybody who knows Mr. Mack knows I'm just like Charlie. I love chocolate too. Walking to school in the mornings, Charlie could see great slabs of chocolate piled high in the shop windows, and he would stop and stare and press his nose against the glass, his mouth watering like mad. And many times a day he would see other children taking creamy candy bars out of their pockets and munching them greedily, and that, of course, was pure torture for poor Charlie. Only once a year, on his birthday, did Charlie Bucket ever get to taste a bit of chocolate. The whole family saved up their money for that special occasion, and when the great day arrived, Charlie was always presented with one small chocolate bar to eat all by himself. And each time he received it, on those marvelous birthday mornings, he would place it carefully in a small wooden box that he owned and treasured it as though it was a solid bar of gold. And for the next few days, he would allow himself only to look at it, but never to touch it. Then at last, when he could no longer stand it, he would peel back a tiny bit of paper, wrapping at one corner to expose a tiny bit of chocolate. And then he would take a tiny nibble, just enough to allow the lovely sweet taste to spread out slowly over his tongue. The next day he would take another tiny nibble, and so on and so on. And in this way, Charlie would make his 10-cent bar of birthday chocolate last him for more than a month. But I haven't told you about the one awful thing that tortured Charlie, the lover of chocolate, more than anything else. This thing, for him, was far, far worse than seeing slabs of chocolate in the shop windows or watching other children munching creamy candy bars right in front of him. It was the most terrible, torturing thing you can imagine. And it was this. In the town itself, actually within sight of the house which Charlie lived, there was an enormous chocolate factory. Just imagine that. And it wasn't simply an ordinary enormous chocolate factory either. It was the largest and most famous in the whole world. It was Wonka's factory, owned by a man called Mr. Willy Wonka, the greatest inventor and maker of chocolate that there ever was born. And what a tremendous, marvelous place it was. It had huge iron gates leading into it and a high wall surrounding it and smoke belching from its chimneys and strange whizzing sounds coming from deep inside. And outside the walls, for at least a mile around in every direction, the air was scented with the heavy, rich smell of melting chocolate. I can smell it now. Twice a day on his way to and from school, little Charlie Bucket had to walk right past the gates of the factory. And every time he went by, he would begin to walk very, very slowly. And he would hold his nose high in the air and take long, deep sniffs of the gorgeous chocolatey smell all around him. Oh, how he loved that smell. And oh, how he wished he could go inside that factory and see what it was like. And there's a picture of Charlie breathing in that delicious scent of chocolate. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of chapter 1. Now, I know what you're thinking. It's a quick chapter. Hey, some of the best books have quick chapters, and sometimes there's long chapters. This one happens to be a short chapter, and it's a good introduction. We got to meet the Bucket family. All the grandparents, Mom and Dad, and little Charlie. We found out some information. We found out that Charlie, above everything else in the whole world, loves chocolate. And that his family is very poor. So he can only have one chocolate bar a year, and that is on his birthday. And the ironic thing is, they're so poor he can never get the chocolate all the other children have. And right outside his window, he can see the largest chocolate factory in the entire world, Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. So he lives in a town with the largest chocolate factory, and yet, because of being so poor, he can't have more chocolate. But that makes him love his chocolate all the more. Takes a small chocolate bar and makes it last for how long? A month. Absolutely. So that's the first chapter of Willy Wonka, of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I got to watch myself. I don't want to catch. That's the name of the movie. The book is Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Take good care. We're going to come back and read chapter 2 and just keep going. Have a great night. Take care of yourself. Maybe if you can, have a chocolate bar. Bye-bye.